All right, here we go. Our next session is our keynote with U.S. Attorney Ismail Ramsey, and I've really been looking forward to this. So, by way of introduction, Ismail Ramsey is a U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of California. He was confirmed by the Senate and sworn into the office in March 2023, and previously served as an AUSA in that office. In addition, for over 17 years, Mr. Ramsey was a partner at Ramsey and Ehrlich in Berkeley, California. He holds a BA from Harvard, an MBA from the Haag School of Business, and a JD from Harvard, and is also a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. Mr. Ramsey, we're really grateful you can join us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And our moderator today is Melinda Haag. She's a partner at Weiss in San Francisco. And of course, Melinda was one of Mr. Ramsey's predecessors as the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of California. She held that position for 5 years and previously served for 9 years as an AUSA and chief of the white collar section in that office. Melinda, welcome, and thank you so much for moderating.
Thank you, Bruce. Happy to be here. All right, we have 30 minutes, so we have to get started.
Speed round.
People want me to ask you hard questions, so forgive me.
All right. But what he didn't say in the introduction was that you were my boss when you were chief of white collar.
I was. He was a very, very good AUSA, very productive. So everybody always wants to know what your enforcement priorities are. I think when people ask that question, they don't really understand they don't fully understand what the Northern District of California is, and the realities of your office in terms of resources. So the Northern District of California has 3 major metropolitan areas: San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland, 15 counties, 15 DAs, 15 sheriffs, right?
Mm-hmm. And lots of chiefs of police.
And lots of chiefs. The sheriffs are especially interesting, especially up in the Northeast.
Yep, they're a little bit different than in San Francisco and Oakland.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Alameda, I should say.
Yes, you've got the Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. You have 3 state prisons, which are relevant to you. You have a large expanse of rural, agricultural, and suburban areas in addition to the cities. You have more than 300 public companies. Last count for me, 33 Native American tribes.
Yes.
And 9 million people. Mm-hmm. So what do you do and that's your jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. So what do you do as the U.S. Attorney? What resources do you have? How many people do you have? What are your budgetary issues? How do you decide what to focus on, and what do you focus on?
All right. So thanks for the context, because we really do have one of the most diverse districts in the country. It's an extra large district. As you know, the districts are divided into small, medium, large, and extra large, and we're an extra large. And I think that applies both to population and geography. Spans more than 450 miles, and like you said, over 9 million people. I think what we do is look for what are the most impactful problems we can try to address in the district. And that's driven, one, by what members of the community tell us are their biggest problems, and also what we hear from Main Justice, what are priority programs, often driven by crime statistics. So, when we do have such a diversity of areas where, like you said, where it can be, Oakland, or it can be Lake County, or the Forgotten County, San Benito County, there can be very different priorities. For me, I really think there are 4 priorities that we've set that we think, address problems in the district, and where we can make an impact. So our first priority is something that's maybe relevant to people here because of where they live, but not necessarily where their practice area is, and that's fentanyl. Fentanyl, the Tenderloin area in San Francisco, and just fentanyl distribution generally is a major problem of the district. 850 people, more than 850 people died last year of fentanyl overdoses in our district. In San Francisco alone, 110,000 across the country. So that's a priority of the district. The department as a whole, and definitely a priority for our district itself and for our office. Second is violent crime. violent crime, particularly in metropolitan areas. So the East Bay, Alameda County, and Cocoa County. So that's a significant interest. And third, kind of where we are here now, Silicon Valley and intellectual property. It's some of the most valuable business assets of the nation are here, and we think it's important that those be protected and that we keep the capital markets free of fraud so that money and investments can continue to pour into this area to fuel innovation and the innovation and technology capital of the world. And then fourth priority goes to civil rights. I think we have had specific issues here, particularly around AAPI, hate issues, but the protecting civil rights is at the core of what the Department of Justice does. The Department of Justice was founded in the 1870 Act, quite frankly, to deal with civil rights violations for freed slaves during Reconstruction. And so that's kind of at the core of what we do. And so that's our fourth priority. In terms of how many people we have to deal with it, we do have limited resources, even though I think sometimes people think the government has limitless resources. But, our number of AUSAs fluctuates according to budget. I'd say the tide is going out right now, so it's lessening given the budget and the agreements in Congress surrounding the debt ceiling and what happened to the Justice Department's budget for fiscal year 24. I'd say our numbers are around 130 AUSAs plus or minus 5. But right now, the budget's a situation that as AUSAs leave, we're not able to replace them just yet. So we're kind of in a de facto hiring freeze, not an exact hiring freeze, but we don't have enough money to pay for new AUSAs. So that means we're receding. But that's about the number. We have to figure out how to divide them, what units to put them in to try to address those priorities and also address other issues in the district. I mean, those are the priorities, but everything we do in our office is important. And so it's not as though we can drop everything outside of those four priorities.
So is it fair to say you're kind of constantly scrambling to cover the work of the district?
I don't want to say scrambling, but I'm constantly thinking about how we're deploying resources. That's something you don't really think about as an AUSA, but you're familiar with. In addition to the AUSAs, we have civil servants who deal with budget. And so I'm constantly thinking about where we're going to have money to deploy, and it's not just AUSAs, it's also paralegals, it's legal techs, it's litigation support, it's e-discovery. Those are all things that are weighing on the budget that you have to balance. If when you take away from one area, whether it's AUSAs, that may affect another. Or if you assign resources to one area, you won't have resources to assign to other areas. So you constantly have to be thinking about that. It's a Tetris puzzle about how you fit those things together that is always changing and just keeps coming at you, and you have to keep trying to think about where you're going to put those pieces.
Yeah. The resource issue really dovetails into my next question, and that the basis of this is the job of the U.S. Attorney, I think, is much broader than most people realize. Mm-hmm. You have a responsibility to the community. I assume you spend a lot of time with community groups, mm-hmm. with different concerns, policing, youth violence, mm-hmm. Human trafficking. I'm sure you're spending time with community groups. You're spending time with law enforcement partners. Mm-hmm. And you're spending time with Maine Justice, other U.S. attorneys' offices, other U.S. attorneys. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair, all those things.
So will you talk with the group about the last of those three that I just mentioned, your work with Maine Justice, with the Attorney General's Advisory Committee and the subcommittees with other U.S. attorneys, and how that helps maybe with respect to resources?
Yeah, so first, there's something called the AGAC, the Attorney General's Advisory Committee, which is a committee of U.S. attorneys that advises the Attorney General on various policy issues. So essentially it's set up so that there's a chair, a vice chair, and one representative from every circuit. Our circuit's representative right now is Natalie White, who's the U.S. Attorney in Oregon. And then underneath the AGAC, there are subcommittees by substantive areas of the law or administration. So there's one for immigration, there's one for violent crime, there's one for cyber, there's one for civil rights, there's one for white collar, and on and on. And most U.S. attorneys sit on 3 or 4 of the subcommittees. And so, for example, I'm on civil rights, I'm on cyber, and I'm on white collar. And so we have regular quarterly meetings where we talk about issues that are affecting the Department of Justice and sort of what policies we should have move forward, and make recommendations up through the AGAC to the Attorney General and the DAG. And then even within those subcommittees, we have working groups. So, for example, I'm on the hate crimes working group, the human trafficking working group, the civil rights subcommittee, and I'm also on the AI working group of white collar. That's a big part of our job that people in the defense bar don't really see. Kind of nobody sees it other than the U.S. attorneys who work on it, unless people are invited to our meetings. We have in-person meetings, and we also have virtual meetings. So that's an important part of the department. Things, and we may talk about this later, things like the voluntary self-disclosure program are often worked and developed through the AGAC process and through one of these subcommittees, and it's how you coordinate amongst U.S. attorneys nationally to affect main justice policy. Also, through those subcommittees, you're often dealing with division heads or component heads from main justice. So, Kristen Clark in the Civil Rights Division will often work with the Civil Rights Subcommittee of the AGAC to develop policies in the civil area, for example, delegation memos, et cetera. And then you also try to work with industry. So that's a big part of the job. And then outside of the AGAC subcommittees, often you're meeting by circuit. We had a case, Duarte, that came down recently related to gun possession cases. And so all the circuit U.S. attorneys get together and try to talk about how we're addressing that in the Ninth Circuit. And then here in California, I have monthly meetings with the other 3 U.S. attorneys where we try to address different issues that are affecting our office and seeing how what we're doing in different districts, making sure that there's some consistency there, and also seeing how we can leverage off our efforts to help one another. We try to have some summits in California where we try to interact with industry and the defense bar. 2 weeks ago, I was down in Los Angeles where all 4 of us hosted a summit on the semiconductor industry where we brought law enforcement from the FBI, Homeland Security, other areas to meet with compliance officers or general counsels from significant semiconductor companies so that we can start to foster that relationship to talk about policy issues and enforcement priorities. So that's generally how the structure goes, but those are things that people don't see every day. Often, I think I talk to people who even were assistant U.S. attorneys, and I think about it the same way, and they think about what's happening in court, not necessarily what's happening out of court. And you touched on a bunch of other things. There's just a ceremonial aspect to the job where sometimes you need to show up to represent the Department of Justice. So sometimes you may do that for fallen heroes, memorials, for example, or ceremonies related to things, law enforcement who were killed in line of duty. I recently did a couple of those. And then you have a whole nother set of things with tribal issues, like you said, 33 federally recognized tribes in our district, which is probably one of the 5 largest in the country in terms of tribes. So, I've traveled to Indian tribes to talk about some of the law enforcement issues that are there, that are, far up north, whether it's Hoopa Valley or Yurok or some of the other tribes that are out there.
Right. It's great context because I think the folks in this room would like you to focus solely on white collar matters. But there's an awful lot of things that you need to do in your job. But turning to some of the white collar things, aspects of your job, the Disruptive Technology Task Force, is that something that sort of arose out of this coordination and communication with the other U.S. attorneys in Main Justice?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we're in Silicon Valley. Like I said, we've got some of the most valuable intellectual property in the country, and even more significantly, we have intellectual property that helps us as a nation maintain our edge, both militarily and economically. And so, there's some very sensitive technologies there, semiconductor industry, and others. So the Disruptive Technology Strike Force is a joint effort between the Department of Commerce and the Department of Justice to try to protect some of these sensitive technologies, which quite frankly are threatened by other nation states. And so there now are 15 districts in the country that are part of the strike force that, I'd say that the task, as it's described, is to keep our nation's most sensitive secrets out of the hands of our most dangerous adversaries. So it's using export control laws and sanctions laws to try to make sure that companies and academics are continuing to innovate and are able to innovate, but are doing it in a way that doesn't endanger our countries or our allies. It's probably about 3 months ago, we had the 1-year anniversary of the Disruptive Technology Strike Force. We held it down in Arizona, 2-day conference to discuss some of the cases that we did. And sort of most significantly, Ukraine sent a delegation, and it was their, sort of one of their forensic departments that really talked about what they were seeing on the battlefield in terms of missiles that they are investigating that have landed and done great destruction in Ukraine. But what are the components of some of those missiles, and what are the semiconductor chips that they're seeing in those missiles? And some of those, unfortunately, are chips that were produced in the United States. And so we're trying to ensure that those chips and other key components that can be used against us and our allies are not finding their way into the hands of nation states that they then may be making weapons to use on the battlefield. So using export control and sanctions laws, and they were quite clear about what they were learning. So that's part of a national priority, and is important for the national security of the nation. So that's the Disruptive Technology Strike Force.
So working with in the strike force model like that is really a force multiplier in a way. Mm-hmm. You're sharing information, sharing ideas, working with other U.S. Mm-hmm. attorneys' offices. You also work with Main Justice and your partners at other enforcement agencies, I think, mm-hmm. For many reasons, but it also has the effect of being a force multiplier. Can you talk about your work with Main Justice, the SEC, other agencies?
Yeah, sure. Let me, break it up. First, I'll talk a little bit about National Security Division and the Disruptive Technology Strike Force, and then I can talk about other agencies. Just last week, we did a session with the Rock Center here at Stanford Law, where Matt Olson, who's the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the National Security Division, came out, and we did some tabletop exercises with him, some other folks from National Security and our National Security and Cyber Division, with leaders from various tech companies here about how to respond in a crisis situation, if there's a security threat, if a cyber threat, how to deal with that. So we work very closely with the components, the divisions in Washington on these different issues. And, often on cases that we're working on, we have lawyers from the relevant component, or as component division synonyms for Washington, who are working in these areas. So, the Ding case, which was a Disruptive Technology Strike Force case, which involves Google in some technology and artificial intelligence, which we've indicted, was done in conjunction with the National Security Division and their lawyers. As far as other agencies, sort of across the board, we're working with them. We're, just next week, our office in the Eastern District of California is doing a summit at Travis Air Force Base with various government agencies about healthcare fraud. So we're routinely trying to make sure we coordinate in those areas. And then Monique Winkler, Regional Director, SEC, myself, Leslie Wolf from Antitrust, and Carrie O'Brien from FTC. We have monthly meetings where we get together and talk about our priorities and how we can work together and how we can be more efficient in that. And we actually do those in person. So we go to one of our offices to make sure that we're discussing what's going on there and that we have full coordination.
That's great. I mean, not all districts have that level of cooperation between agencies. I think it's a nod to the district and a tribute to the district that you all work together so well.
Yeah. Now, and we have great partners, and we're all trying to get it right and make sure that there's compliance with the laws and that there's not misconduct. And not just amongst agencies, also amongst districts. I have monthly meetings with the U.S. attorneys from California. We meet in quarterly with those from the Pacific Rim. And sometimes you just those sort of quarterly meetings and monthly meetings just facilitate relationships. So you actually can pick up the phone and call someone and talk to them when you have a question or have an issue. And so that sort of coordination and cooperation is essential. I say the 3 C's: coordination, cooperation, and collaboration.
So you have yourself and your 130 AUSAs, but you have a huge network of people, federal officials and otherwise, to draw on.
Yeah, we do. I mean, we have all the federal agencies. So you see people start to say, what's your day like? I mean, you see it's lots of meetings with different people in different agencies. I have monthly meetings with called our Fed head meetings, which are with the heads of all law enforcement agencies. So, every month, the special agent in charge of the FBI, the SAC of Secret Service, Homeland Security, the commander of Federal Protective Services, the inspector in charge of Postal, IRS, and ATF. We all meet and talk about what's going on in each of our agencies and how we can coordinate and help each other better. And that's not just in the white collar area, but in our other priority areas, fentanyl and violent crime, and that's how we came up with our all hands on deck initiative that relates to fentanyl.
Yeah, very important in San Francisco in particular. Can you describe the office's work in the white collar area, generally what you're focusing on in terms of white collar? You've mentioned a couple things in connection with the strike force, but what are you trying to accomplish in the white collar area?
Yeah, and again, to go back to what I think our priorities are and how we set them, we try to evaluate, like I said, what are the biggest problems in our district that we think we can help solve with either a civil or a criminal law component. And so, that helps drive, our priorities and our priorities here in Silicon Valley. So in addition to protecting intellectual property, the theft of it from other nation states, we want to make sure that there's fair competition and that companies aren't attempting to steal trade secrets from their competitors to try to get an unfair advantage. So that's one thing that we're focused on, is not just economic espionage, but theft of trade secrets. And then, like I said, we want to make sure that capital continues to flow, that the investments flow into Silicon Valley. Like I said, it is the great engine of innovation in our country, but what drives that innovation in part is making sure that there's investments in it and that the markets are fair. So we want to make sure that there's not fraud in the markets, that there's not the fake it till you make it, that there's not misrepresentations about what folks are doing and that there's fraud. So those cases are a priority for us. Building on what happened in Theranos and other cases recently, Headspin. We want to make sure that people are being honest and not lying about what their capabilities are or what the state of their research is. So, fake it till you make it cases is a priority. And then, what will always be some part of what we do in a bread and butter is insider trading cases. Again, making sure that the markets are fair, and that's the public market. So, that's the essence of what we're looking to do in the white collar area.
And these are complex cases. They take a lot of resources.
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah. You brought Gina Choi in,
Gina
and others from that have experience with the SEC. Can you talk about how that is helpful to the U.S. Attorney's Office?
Yeah.
I know why Gina is helpful to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yeah, if we're talking about different, accounting fraud, I mean, these are complicated white-collar cases, and working with other agencies are important, making sure that, the defense bar, understands that we have people who are, capable in these areas is important. And so we do have, several folks who've been working these cases for years, throughout their career in different areas. So I did bring Gina in to head our corporate and securities fraud. She was a regional director of the SEC. So, it's great to have those relationships, but she's not the only one. Lloyd Farnham, who's been in our office a long time and is a senior litigation counsel in the corporate and securities fraud area, also is someone who has spent years in the SEC. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to be here today. He's taken a much-deserved vacation, but he's another person who has great relationships with the SEC and experience in these areas. Bob Leach, who couldn't be here today as well because he's in trial, in the Lynch trial, in this area. He's another person who, worked at the SEC. And then we just have great AUSAs who've been working in this area or, have worked in the Justice Department for a long time who bring, a high level experience in these areas. And, many of them are here today. Ben Kingsley, I saw earlier, is head of our Oakland office. Garth Heyer is here. Noah Stern. We've got Pat O'Brien is here. I hope I'm not missing anyone. Wave if I'm not seeing you. But these are all folks who are very experienced AUSAs and have have a great track record. When I go to these different events, I get to talk to a lot of general counsel, and it's nice. Just the other day, I was at a group of compliance officers and general counsel, and it was nice. One stopped me and told me how great a job Garth Heyer had been doing. And it was a major Fortune 500 company, and I know the amount of effort that it takes to put into those cases, and that's important to hear. The general counsel of Williams Sonoma cornered me just 2 nights ago when I was at the Views from the Top to tell me how the great job that Christian Highsmith and others had been doing working on cases related to some things where they were the victims, so an insider trading case. So that's great to hear, and and have a great team.
It's terrific. I think we have a minute and a half left, and I have to ask you about your whistleblower policy.
Yeah.
Is the clock right? I have to ask you about your whistleblower policy.
Yikes.
I was hearing grumblings about it while we were waiting to come on. In March of this year, the Northern District of California launched a whistleblower policy. The Southern District of New York launched a similar policy, and DOJ launched sort of a companion policy, if you will. Can you talk about the origin of that? It's only in the Northern District of California and the Southern District of New York at the moment, it appears, and the companion policy from DC. Can you talk about the origin of that, why it is what it is, and what your thoughts are about it?
So I go back to sort of the VSD policy, voluntary self-disclosure, and so that we get into it in a minute. Even before that, the DAG, the Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, really encouraged programs around voluntary self-disclosure. And as part of that, through the AGAC's White Collar Committee, all 93 districts or U.S. attorneys' offices came up with a corporate voluntary self-disclosure program. The reason there's only 2 individual whistleblowers and not for corporations is I'd like to think that us in the Southern District of New York are the most bold. So, we issued policies on our own because we thought it was the right thing to do. We think it's important to encourage individuals to come forth and report misconduct. It could be important in the corporate fraud area, but it can also be important in areas like corporate in public corruption. So, those are the 2 districts that move the most quickly, the most boldly. I talked to Damian Williams about this. He's the U.S. Attorney in Southern District of New York. Some of the benefits that they saw, they moved quick first. We moved right behind them. Since then, I think Main Justice thought, and I agree with them, it's important that there be some consistency in these policies. And so there was sort of an informal freeze on those. And now the AGAC White Collar Crime Committee is working to try to come up with some consistent aspects to any policy that gets rolled out. But in the meantime, we were the first. There are some things that are different district to district, and if you compare the 2 policies, we're Silicon Valley, so we have intellectual property as part of our policy, whereas they don't. So, but that's how it got rolled out. I think we were the bold, and we were the first because we were the most willing to take a step. But now I guarantee you there are other policies that are coming. They're just trying to see what aspects should be consistent across all districts.
Well, there's so much more to talk about. I think I speak on behalf of everybody when I thank you on behalf of everyone here and everyone in the district for your thoughtfulness, your judgment, your integrity, and your leadership of the office.
Thanks. I learned from the best.
Appreciate it.